Hello everybody, it's the Warhipster here, coming at you with a slightly different video to what we normally do around these parts. Yes, today is a video about theory, basically. Yeah, a couple of weeks ago I did a stream about how I figure out my Contrast Plus recipes. And, well, this is that stream. Yeah, we've cut the stream up, we've made it a little bit more succinct, we've added the red circles. They're in there so you can see what I'm actually pointing at when the cursor disappears. And, well, yeah, this video is about how to come up with contrast colors, or at least helping you get the tools to do it yourselves, should you want to. So let's jump in, shall we? Let's have a look. Today, we are talking about how to figure out color schemes. This is how I do it. This is how I choose my paints. This is how I choose my primer. And these are the tips and tricks you can use when figuring these things out for yourself. So, yeah, I hope you enjoy this one. We are live. So we're just going to jump into it. So, as far as it goes when it comes to figuring out color schemes, what I mean by that is, rather than figuring out whether or not I want them to be blue and green, I think the question that often gets asked is, how do you figure out which paint to use? And what is the motivation behind using which paint? And why does it work? And this, that, and the other. And I think that we can chalk that up to a couple of different things. One, I make decisions based on experience. Two, I make decisions based on research. And three, I make decisions based on ease, essentially. So in the example of things like my Deathcore of Krieg, I wanted a very specific type of green, so I wanted to do something that was simple rather than mixing up a bunch of contrast colors to get to where I wanted to get to, and ultimately having to do a lot of testing to get to the right tone of green. So that what I wanted was a Strachan green highlight. Basically, I wanted a military green with a Strachan green highlight. That was basically the thing that I wanted. So in that instance, the quickest way to do that in terms of ease is not to mix a bunch of contrast colors, because if you're then going to take that color out and paint it over sort of 40 or 50 or 60 or 70 or even 100 different models, then you're going to have to get that mix right every single time. And some people would suggest, well, why don't you just use a wet palette? Well, then you're not in control of how much you're thinning down your contrast paint, and you've got water in contact with your contrast paint. Or, if you're going to be painting thousands of models, why not mix the ratios in a pot and keep that pot? Well, I'm never going to paint that many miniatures. So I want it to be as simple as possible. And the way to make it as simple as possible in that instance, the answer was use a layer paint, and then shade it, and then highlight it. Given as it's only a spot color, it's kind of not a main color of the army, that felt like a sensible thing to do. Now, in the interest of what we're talking about today, we're talking about Emperor's Children and how we're going to figure out how to paint the pink, because we have a couple of options at our disposal without doing any research and without looking at anything. And we will also talk about how we're going to paint the black, and we will also talk about how we paint the silver, but we have to go back to where it begins. So the question is, how do we paint Emperor's Children? Well, in order to do that, we have to do a little bit of research first. So the first thing we do is we have a look at what the models I'm being asked to paint are, by you guys, by anybody, by myself, by the voices in my head. So the question is, how do we paint the Emperor's Children? And if we find a decent enough miniature to look at that we can blow at large, this looks pretty good to me. Let's open this image in a new tab. There we go, nice and big. So we can see here the kind of, I guess you would say the main scheme colors, as it were. We have the pink, we have the black, we have the silver, we have things like brass and stuff, and we have a little kind of like a sort of off greeny white. We have some sort of more vibrant green here and stuff like that. These are kind of could be changed in and out, and these are the simplest areas to do things with. You can do them as complicated or as simply as you like, but this is generally the kind of thing I wouldn't worry too much about. But the main scheme colors are the things that we want to look at, and there's a couple of things to look at initially first about when we're doing our research and looking at these miniatures. They're telling you what paints they're going to be, and this is where experience comes into it. So I've painted a lot of miniatures. I know I've painted a ton of miniatures, and I'm in a very privileged position of being a YouTuber who has a YouTube channel where if I can't remember how I do something, I can just go and look back through my list of videos, and that will tell me a color that I could use. But given the experience that I have, there's a number of assumptions I can make here based on what I'm looking at. And the places to look on these colors, for example, are at edges and recesses. So edges, in terms of the black, here we go. So to my eyes, this black here looks grey. So the black's not the difficult part. The black is Black Legion in my mind, or even if you wanted to paint it in with Chaos Black or something like that, or any other black paint in the world, you could use that. But for me, it's going to be Black Legion because it's a nice deep black. It's a sheen of black. So the answer for me there is Black Legion. That's what we're going to do. So we're going to start with Black Legion. But how do we figure out what the highlight color is, and also consequently what the shade color is going to be? Well, like I said, we look at the edges. So you see the edge of this hand just here. That is grey. It's not blue, it's not purple, it's not green, it's grey. So I always default to a certain set of colours there. And the colours that I would use to create a grey highlight on a black detail is, depending on how dark I want it to be, and in this instance it is quite dark, it's not overpowering. It's Eshin Grey, followed by Dawnstone, followed by Administratum Grey. You can see all of that in action here. So you can see a little Administratum Grey right there on the elbow. There's a little dot right at the top there. Just there. There's a little dot. That's your Administratum Grey. That's the sharpest point. You can see it on the gorget as well. Just up here, underneath that silver. There's a little dot just there. And you can't see it on here, which is lead me to believe that this would be the kind of not the sharpest point, as they've decided that that's going to be when they've been painting it themselves. So this to me is Dawnstone all the way across. But this here, this line on the underside, that's the darkest grey in the form of Eshin Grey. Obviously, we've got a different black that you can see just over here, which is this part on the gun. Now, there's hints of green in that at the top there. You can see it just there. You can see it along the top edge there as well. Ultimately, I probably wouldn't, for the sake of keeping the tutorial easy or simple, or to try and keep the paints list down, we wouldn't go in there and then choose to use something like, well, it's quite a dark green there. We wouldn't use something like Cabalite green or something, just for the sake of keeping things on target, as it were. Just trying to keep things as simple as possible. So this we would probably end up doing in the same colour as the rest of the black details, given as the black armour, because it's not gonna. It's based on what I'm looking at in terms of the noise marines. It's not going to appear very often. If we look at the leg down here, there's definitely a blue or a bluish green that's going on here. So this is to denote that this is not armor, this is leather. So there is the difference. You can see, and you can see it based on this marine down here. And look at this hand just here. You can see the Eshin grey around the inside. You can see that lighter grey around the outside. That's your Dawnstone. And then the Administratum grey will be appearing here somewhere, for example, across the knuckles there. There's just little white spots. But down here you can see that slightly greenish tint, maybe a slightly bluish tint. It's, to me, my eye, it looks green. It might look blue to you, which would be similar in that regard to the pipe here on the sonic weapon. I'm not entirely sure what it's called. So that's how we figure out this color, and you can do this across all of these colors and just look for things like edges. That will indicate how you're going to edge highlight it, which will indicate what the back color is going to be. Because we're going for grey, it's just a sheen black. So it's going to be Null Oil is what we're going to shade that Black Legion with. So Black Legion, Null Oil, Eshin Grey, Dawnstone, Administratum Grey at a push. You might not even use the Administratum Grey. I might not use the Administratum Grey when it comes to filming these videos eventually, if ever we do. Now we look at something a little bit different. So if we look at a brighter colour, for example, the skull on the end here. So this is where things can get a little bit tricky. Now the top colour, as it were, the bit on the kind of the raised details, that to me is a white. It could be a slightly off-white, could be a greenish white, could be something like a bluish white, but to me the top colour is white. So really what we need to figure out to get this colour sorted is what's going on in those recesses. And that could be a number of different things. And again, this is where that question about whether it's going to be a difficult scheme to do or whether it's going to be an easy scheme to do, this is where this now comes in. So we can achieve this in a number of different ways. We can achieve this by thinning down Pterodon turquoise quite significantly to get this sort of greenish pattern that's going on here. We could use something like Coelia green shade, perhaps. We could thin that down just a little bit, not too much. Pterodon turquoise, we would need to go for quite a few parts, 3 or 4 parts to get it nice and thin to go and get that sort of colour. We could use something like Croxagore scales maybe, or we could use Eldari emerald. We could use all of those to try and make these things really thin. However, again, when it comes to splicing this out over multiple different things, you might not want to do something like that. So actually this is where the experience then also comes in. And we can look at something like that and think, okay, well, it needs to be slightly green and it needs to be white on the top. And there is a perfect paint for this. And it's not going to be quite obvious immediately, but the paint is Briar Queen Chill. Briar Queen Chill basically has this top colour down. It's basically perfect for it, but it won't be perfect for the recesses. But rather than using thinned down Pterodon turquoise to get there, we can look at layering in a different colour over the top to get that sort of mix. So Briar Queen Chill, being what it is basically blue in nature, or at least my eye sees it as blue. It's got a bit of a green, but if we have a look inside, it looks blue to me, and we'll put this on camera for you at some point, but it looks blue to me basically, and we want to add a little bit of green in there. So that's where we can go for a slightly more vibrant green shade. So if we use Briar Queen Chill and we assume that that's the top colour, we can add in something like Poxwalker, because Poxwalker again has a bit of a blue-green edge to it, but that will give us those shades right there in those recesses. And this is what I'm talking about. We're looking at edges and we're looking at recesses. We don't do this on a dark colour like black because, well, there's not really a recess, but there is an edge that we can use to investigate. Whereas for something like the end of the gun, this is where we can look at this sort of thing and figure out that that's where we need to go. And the same thing applies to the flat panel back here on the Noise Blaster, Custom Sonic Blaster, or whatever the hell it's called. So you can see that they're very similar colours. And that's how we would determine that those are the same colour, basically, is we can see this recessing, this kind of shading that's going on in the back left corner next to the gold. We can see that is got that same colour that's going on in here. So actually, we can just cover that in the same way. We can use Briar Queen Chill, and we can use a little bit of Poxwalker just to try and get it in. You won't need too much, and then we can relayer it with some white or something later on, essentially, is what we're trying to get to. So that's basically the fundamentals of it. This is how we're figuring out these schemes. And when you look at Warhammer Community, and when you look at Games Workshop, and you look at the box art, and you look at all the various examples on the internet of really high quality painted miniatures, or tabletop ready, or anything like this, that's the way to look at it. It's to look at edges and look at recesses, and that will tell you what paints you need to use. However, if that's something you're not sure on, there is another way that we can do this, and we shall have a look at this coming up next. Now, I realise a bunch of what we just did was colours that I'm very, very confident on. You know, the black, the white, and all this kind of thing. And we haven't talked about all of them, of course. We will get to some of them in due time. But the thing I want to talk about next is the colour that we don't have the answer to, which is the pink. Now, there's a couple of things that we can try when it comes to the pink. And if we were to limit ourselves to a particular paint range, which is what I am going to do, because it's what we do around here, contrast plus range, we need to figure out ultimately what the suggestion is from Games Workshop to paint that colour is. What is that colour? So one of the best places to do this is the Citadel Colour app. So if we do this, you should see Explore Versatile Contrast Paints. That's nice and convenient for us. So one of the cool things in here is we can just use this to figure out what they suggest, and then we can make our way back from there. So one of the cool things in here is to look at paint by model, and we can go to Warhammer 40,000 and we can just see if they've got anything in here. So let's have a look, shall we? Emperor. Nope. What we can look at, what would it be? Chosen? No. Let's just scroll. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Or it might be under Noise Marine. That's often the thing that can happen. There we go. E. Yep. So let's try Noise Marine. That's not going to help us, is it? Okay. So we don't have a specific model in here that's going to help us. So now we go and look at the other category where we have not paint by model, we have paint by colour. And this is where we go into the pink. Okay. So whilst these aren't necessarily going to be the recipes for us, there might be something in here that helps us figure out what that baseline colour is going to be. And if we look at something like pale pink, looks like the one to me, and we can see what that is. They suggest using White Scar, then Carroburg Crimson, then layer Emperor's Children, and then highlight with Fulgrim Pink. That's what we get to. So this is the final kind of colour that they're saying is what this will give you. I would suggest that that's probably true. Now, looking at that there, that shade, that's not the colour. That's not the colour we want for our pink. It's way too bright. It's way too washed out. So that's not going to work for us. So let's try, what does pale pink contrast tell us to do? Tells us to use Volupus Pink, layer with Emperor's Children, Fulgrim Pink, and then that's what we get. That's what it looks like after one layer of Volupus Pink. Now the key thing here is what we've just learned there, is that for that pale pink, or something like that, it looks to be the closest one to my eye. Maybe this one, but Volupus Pink being consistent, Fulgrim Pink being some form of abomination, whatever that is. To me, the consistent ones here are that we've got Volupus Pink and Emperor's Children is what we've just seen there in the three examples. That is the pink to my mind. Probably this one. However, it doesn't have to be this way. They're saying to spray with grace here. Volupus Pink will then look like that. Emperor's Children looks like that. And then layer of Emperor's Children and a highlight of Fulgrim Pink. That looks pretty close to my mind. However, it's not 100% close, is it? So, this is Emperor's Children. That is the colour that they're saying is the one that is the consistent one. It would make sense because it's called Emperor's Children. Okay, makes sense. So let's have a look at it. Give it a good shake. That looks about right to me. However, it's very vibrant. It's very, very, very vibrant. So we actually would need to darken this down. So if we were to paint it with Emperor's Children, we would want to add a little bit of sort of crimson in there, which is why rather than spray it White Scar and apply Carroburg Crimson over it and then layer with this, I would, if I was going to do it this way, layer it with this and then shade it with Carroburg Crimson. But that's a lot of work. We don't need to do that. That seems like a lot to do. So this is going to lead us in quite nicely to the next part, which is choosing your primer. And hopefully it means that we can go back to this window here. Based on what we've just discovered from the Citadel Paint app, there's been 2 recommendations of white and grey cere. Wraithbone is too warm, I think. It will add too much of a sort of reddy tone in there by applying the Warhipster pink over the top. You have to work a lot harder to get over that versus something like a grey cere or a white scar. What grey cere is the significantly more colder option, and it is my preferred paint primer. So when we look at these pictures that we have over here, we can see, for example, that it's just kind of slightly colder. It's not very warm. It's not very bright either. The only bright section here really is the white and is the pink. But you can see there's this slightly darker area at the edges underneath, for example, the this drum here on the back, under here as well. You can see it kind of on this leg up here. There's a little bit of a darkness on the underside of this. So I actually think there is something that we can do here with contrast paint and a glaze if we need it. Because we're looking for kind of areas of warmth or areas of cold here in this colour. To my mind and to my eye, this is cold. To you, it might look warm. To me, it looks cold. It's not a very inviting pink. It is a cold pink. It's got an element of kind of like pink stretched over skin in many ways. Is that kind of vibe that I'm seeing. We've got this like this little shadow in here and on the underside of the knee. I mean, it's flat up here, but it's almost like a flesh color. It's just a little bit more red in there, or a little bit more yellow. Something there would be significantly more kind of like warmth to it, but I think it's just on the cold side of it. As we've mentioned, if we're going to think that Emperor's Children is our color, well, in the contrast range, this is where we then have 3 choices essentially. We have 3 paints that can be used to do pink. We have Warhipster pink, we have Doomfire magenta, and we have Carroburg crimson. And well, this is where the choices start happening. You see, the majority of the colors on these miniatures are dark and cold. So the spray primer is going to be grey cere, and the majority color that we're actually seeing is black, heavy silver, a little bit of white, a little bit of touch of green here and there, and then gold, warm metallics, okay? So, but we also have like things like white tabards and stuff like that. And if we check out even more pictures of even more stuff, you'll see that there is a consistency between all of them. So if we look at, for example, the flawless blades or something, is that what they're called? Let's open image in a new tab. Let's have a look. Yeah, you can see it here. You've got cold skin right there. There's no warmth in that, which is why Wraithbone is something that we would steer away from. And because of the black being such a prevalent color here, and you can see like the darkened hooves here, it's not an orangey brown that's on the hoof there, it's a dark brown. So we don't want to put warmth into these, so we don't want to use Wraithbone, essentially, is the answer to this question. You can see it on all of this skin, you can see it on all these things. The only bit of warmth that we've got here on this miniature in particular is this tabard right here, and that can be achieved by adding highlights. But otherwise, this is a really cold, leering face that's on the leg. Got really cold kind of skin, and we've got cold hair, and we've got sort of cold greens and this, that, and the other. This kind of rondel on the chest, that's cold. It's again, you might interpret things slightly differently. This is how I'm seeing it. I'm just looking at it. I'm looking for tones of warm red and brown, for example, here in the hoof, which would suggest otherwise. Same for the skin. I'm looking for that kind of Guilliman flesh type tone, but I'm not seeing it. What I'm seeing there is Slaanesh flesh, Slaflesh, if you will. Again, if we look at even more, we can have a look at something like these guys here. We can see these kind of skin wraps that are over the top of the armor on the leg and on the shoulder here. Those are really cold. There's no warmth in that. It's dead flesh. It's not rich, vibrant fresh flesh. It's dead flesh. You can see you've got the kind of, again, maybe this one will work if we look at that. Yeah. So you can see there's little tones of kind of grey in here, and there's a little bit of it just around the kind of the stud there, but you can see it's like kind of this sort of almost bruised purplish look. It's like grey, slightly null oil type thing that's going on around the kind of around the edges in the kind of recesses and stuff. So I'm 99% certain, and this is where the spoiler alert, I've done a little bit of research already, comes from, is that grey cere is the choice. Grey cere for me is going to be the choice for the primer on these miniatures, and that is what I have done. I have chosen grey cere, and well, now that we've chosen grey cere, we now need to figure out how we're going to paint this. So let's figure that out. For example, if you use like the thing with the shades is that, to answer your question, the thing with the shades is that they are really, really cool, and they work really well when there's a lot of recesses around. So like hair, for example, you can do white hair really easily by just throwing null oil over the top of it because there's loads of recesses all over it. But because there isn't loads of recesses over a flat panel, Carabao Crimson, for example, here wouldn't necessarily work. So same for a Skaven tail, it's all the segments of the tail going all the way up. If you use Carabao Crimson over the top of it, it will go into the rings and it will make it look crimsony without needing to do any extra work. It would also substitute doing any highlights because it's a weaker paint than something like a contrast paint. Basically is the answer to that question. We're trying to figure out the pink, okay? And, well, within the contrast range, there are essentially three options that we have at our disposal that are pink. There's a fourth, and technically a fifth as well, but they're not quite right, and I'll demonstrate as to why. So, we have, at our disposal in contrast range, we have Volupus Pink, there it is. We have Doomfire Magenta, there that one is. And then in the shade range, we have Carabao Crimson. And the other two wild card entries are Magos Purple and Sigvald Burgundy. There's lots of decisions about these as to why they're not necessarily going to be the best options to use. So, firstly what we'll do is we'll start by having a look at each of the colours, right? And we're going to kick things off with Carabao Crimson, basically. And we're just going to do this over the top of this piece of palette paper. This will give us a reasonable indicator of what these paints are going to look like. So, Carabao Crimson, here it is, and we're just going to apply it on the paper like that sort of thing. And as you can see, it's pink. It certainly is pink, but it's really thin. You can see around here, there's not a whole lot of warmth to it. There's a bit here and there's a bit here from where I've kind of zhuzhed it a bit. But having applied it to the palette paper, you can see just this is actually the colour that it will look like generally on the upper surface of a model, on the flat of a model. That's generally where it's going to look. So it's not quite strong enough for my mind. In order to make this work, we'd probably have to use a Wraithbone primer, which could work. Could work. Or introduce some warmth into the scheme in order to make the pinkiness, this bit, the flat bit here, really pop. Our next option is Doomfire Magenta. So Doomfire Magenta, here it is, funnily enough, is going to look quite magenta. So we'll just apply some of that. There you go, you can see how much stronger that is than the Carabao Crimson. And if we zhuzh it just a little bit, you can see the kind of thinner tone here and the heavier tone over here. Just by, if we just give it like a little kind of mussing. By forcing that kind of heavier tone to one side and kind of thinning it, like kind of aggressively scraping, basically. You can see what the lighter tone of Doomfire Magenta looks like versus the heavier tone here and here. Does that make sense? So that's the paler bit, that's the darker point. You can see, like I said, complete difference in tone between the two already. So that's Doomfire Magenta. Now, this lighter tone here, this could work. It could. But we'd have to do something about thinning down this area here. We might have to thin it down a little bit more than we perhaps want to over the course of a larger army. Let's say we're shooting for 50 models or something like that. The army box, I believe, it comes with, well, I've got it here in front of me on the screen. The army box has, inside of it, it has 10, 20, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. It has 33 models, by the looks of things, if my eyes don't deceive me, in it. So we're painting over 33 models. Who knows how much of an army that is? That might be 500 points, that might be 1,000 points. It's 40k. Who can tell? So maybe thinning down too much isn't necessarily going to give us that more uniform aspect for this colour. So our next option here is Volupus Pink, and again we'll just apply this like so, and we'll give it a good zhuzhing just to get the lighter tone out and the heavier tone in there. You can see this feels like a much more impactful version of Carroburg Crimson. You can see there's a slight tonal similarity here to here, but this has just got a little bit more vibrance, a little bit more colour in it. This is a lot darker than this over here, but there we go. That kind of makes sense to me. I hope that that's being represented well on camera. Do let me know if it's not. So then we have our two wildcard options. So there's Volupus Pink. This is Magos Purple. Magos Purple is kind of like a pinky purple. So we'll just apply some of this here, get it on the thing, and then we'll give it a good zhuzhing. So we try and keep the paler area here to the darker area there. And you can see here, again, there's a similarity between Carroburg Crimson over here and Magos Purple here, but it's in the dark area here where there's just a little bit too much purple in there. Magos Purple would be great for things like that faultless blades, whatever they're called, for things like the skin. This kind of tone here would make for a really nice kind of added tone to like the skin and the recesses of things like that, but it wouldn't make for a really nice kind of flat surface area because, well, that's just not the right, it's just not the right tone overall, basically. Our final wildcard entry is Sigvald Burgundy, which is going to be the darkest of the lot, and it will make sense as to why I've put it in here as an option in just a second. But if we take Sigvald Burgundy and we just apply it here and we give it a good zhuzhing, there. So you can see, based on the darkest area here, it is by far and away the darkest of the paints. But that pink there, that tone just there, that looks very, very close to what we want. That looks like a more saturated version of this, which is Volupus Pink. To my eyes, at least anyway, at least as I'm understanding it, as I'm looking at it. This looks about right to me, here and here. So this is what you can get out of Sigvald Burgundy, but then that's the question here when we're coming up with the painting video and how we're going to paint the scheme. How much are we going to have to thin down Sigvald Burgundy to get to this colour here? Is it going to be a consistent amount? Is it going to be an easy to do amount? Or is it not? That's the question on everybody's lips, I'm sure. So, one thing that we can do naturally is we can use either of these two paints here to get our pink, and we have to thin them down significantly in order to get there. We could use this one here, and we'd have to thin it down a little bit to get there. we can't really use this one. As it's drying, it's looking more pink, but I'm pretty certain that that's more to do with the exposure on the camera than it is to do with what you're seeing at home. But there you go. That's all the options we have at our disposal. And I think Sigval Burgundy, whilst it's got a really nice pink tone right there, I think it's going to be just a little bit too much work. It might be that we can use it to get some shading on there, or we can use it to kind of paint tabards and things, which will still have elements of this kind of pinky stuff in it. That could work. I think Doomfire Magenta is also just not quite right here. I think this recess here, if we start thinning things down, you're still going to see some of this in there, and that's not quite the right color to my eyes. I don't think Carroburg Crimson is correct, and I think I'm just going to give Carroburg Crimson another blob on the palette because I don't feel like it's fair enough. I want you to see what I'm talking about here. So we'll give Carroburg Crimson a second go round. It's just too cold. One drop of Sigvald in a fresh pot of medium. Yeah, that might do it. Yeah, but I don't think that that's correct. So what I've got here is I've got Larmium medium, and I also have contrast medium. Now, here's the thing. Contrast medium is going to be really effective at getting a pink from something like Sigval Burgundy, or from Volupus Pink, or even from Doomfire Magenta. Contrast medium is going to be really good at that, but we're painting really smooth armor panels, and contrast medium, whilst it's great at creating shades out of other paints, what it's not so great at is making the paint easier to work with, which is why contrast medium is great for diluting and creating other colors. Larmium medium does a little bit less dilution, but what it does do is it creates a really much easier paint with which to create that kind of flow, basically. So I think contrast medium is going to work really well for something like Sigval Burgundy or even Doomfire Magenta, but I think Larmium medium is the one we want for our smooth armor panels when we're painting over the top of our Chaos Space Marines. And to my mind, I think that means that we want to use maybe Volupus Pink. And we've done all of this testing so far. The kind of next thing to do is to test mixes, and I will then come back and say, I think this is where experience then also comes into it. Knowing kind of what you're trying to do with the mediums is kind of 90% of the battle. So contrast medium in a 1-to-1 ratio with paint will create half the strength of the original paint. 2 parts contrast medium to 1 part will create one that's theoretically around sort of 30 to 40%. It's all kind of theoretically, right? But if you take a millimeter of like fruit juice and put a millimeter of water in, what you have is 2 millimeters of fruit water. If you see what I mean. So 1 brush load of contrast medium and 1 brush load of Sigval Burgundy will create a effectively half-life of Sigval Burgundy. At least that is the theory. Whereas Larmium medium won't quite do half. What it will do is it will do maybe sort of 30% dilution and changing. But what it will do is it will make it a lot runnier. So it becomes a much more familiar paint to apply. So I think, and I'm going to just now use my expertise, okay? This is my experience that is going to shine through. I think what we want for this, to keep things simple, is we want a roughly 2 parts Larmium medium to 1 part Volupus Pink mix. And that is going to give us a really decent pink. And it might be that we have to do it 2 layers or do a little bit of blending to get that kind of different thing going on. But I think that's the right key. So I think we're going to go for 1 brush load of Larmium medium and 1 more brush load of Larmium medium, and then we're going to go for 1 brush load of Warhipster pink. And if we give that zhuzhing, I think that's it. That right there. So you can see we've taken, this is Warhipster pink here, we've taken out a lot of the darkness that you can see here in the darkest part here. We've still kept the colour, and it feels, even with all that zhuzhing, you see how it's kind of slowly moving out. So you can see all my brush strokes and stuff in here, right? You can see them around there, see them in here, you can see them in here. You can see how it's all kind of, you can see a little bit around the outside here, but this, even with all of that, and I was pressing quite hard, you could see my bristles going, bah. You can see how it's just kind of moving together. You see? See how it's just that little bit flatter? I think that's the one. How would Doomfire look at the same dilution? Great question. Let's do that, shall we? Why was it the only paint that I left closed? So, Doomfire magenta. So let's go 1 of Larmium, 2 of Larmium, 1 of Doomfire. Zhuzh, 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 zhuzh. Trying to get brush strokes, trying to get brush strokes. It's not doing a great job. There you go. So you see how it's got this kind of, it's almost too, without knowing how these colours are made up, because I'm not a scientist nor an artist, but it feels too blue. It's too pink. It's too the wrong way. You can see how this is drying here, right? You can see how this is drying. What's magenta made up of? That's the question. I don't know. I'm recording this and I'm putting this in a video, so I imagine the comments will all say magenta is made up of this. But it feels like it's not quite right. You can see over here it's also not quite right. We can try these. We'll do a. I'll show you a. I'll show you a. This one, Sigval Burgundy. So this is 1 of Larmium medium. This is 2 of Larmium medium, and then this is 1 of Sigval Burgundy. So what happens as we start to thin down Sigval Burgundy is the darker tones of it start to merge with the brighter tones. So it takes a lot more medium. See how it starts to kind of claim it back? It's just that's too rare. So in order to get this to look right, we would need to go for like a 3rd blob of Larmium medium, and then maybe a 4th and there you go. Now you can see the dark tone is starting to come out of it. But now we're at the point where we're using 4 parts Larmium medium to 1 part Sigval Burgundy. Whilst that's a nice colour, that's too much. Because again, if we're basing this off of the idea that we've got the army set, that's 33 models. This will cover maybe 1 model. So you want to do that 33 times? I don't think it is. It's too purple, is what the chat says. Doomfire Emperor's Children would be wild on the table. Yes, it would. Yes, it would, Psycho Dice. I'm using a medium layer brush to do all of these mixes. This is what I generally use because it's just a good tool for doing it. It means you can do it quicker rather than using something like a small layer brush or whatnot. I think we found it here. The Volupus one definitely feels the closest, says chat. Diedrich, you and I, same wavelength, I think. I think this is it. I think this is the one right here. So the only thing left to do is to actually test it. So a 4:1 ratio in this instance, Martin, is a great question. The reason you'd use a 4:1 ratio, and the reason I've kind of sort of moved towards 4:1, is that what a 4:1 will do is it will just lessen that heavy pigment and help you to avoid that kind of spotting, that coffee staining. So 4:1 contrast medium, not contrast medium, 4:1 Larmium medium is a flow improver that targets specifically the heavy pigment, but there's enough paint there that it won't lose too much of its overall property. And that's the reason why it kind of works. This is just my lived experience. It might be different for other people, but I feel like 4:1 has enough color saturation of what you want, the original color, but 1 just throws in that little bit of kind of flow improver, which is airbrush aficionados out there will understand. You put in a little bit of flow improver just to make it so it works. The 1 there is basically creating a sort of, it's making the darker pigment wetter for longer so that it helps you apply it smoothly over a larger surface, is basically how I've understood it. I might be completely wrong, but that's my experience, and it's worked in a lot of videos so far. So if you were to mix something like Doomfire and Volupus Pink together, I think the same effect would happen if you mix Baal Red and Blood Angels Red together. Baal Red is basically a single pigment, and Blood Angels Red is basically 2 pigments. But you're mixing single pigment with 2 pigments, and I feel like what ends up happening is the Baal Red just dominates it. So I think Doomfire Magenta would just dominate Volupus Pink, basically. Is the reason why I wouldn't suggest it. When you have paints that are similar, so you have something along the lines of, let's say, Pterodon Turquoise and Ultramarines Blue. When you mix the two together, you've got a darker pigment and a lighter pigment, heavier and softer. You've got those two different things together. Those 2 things are mixing at the same time. It becomes basically 4 things are mixing at the same time, basically. I think with the single pigments, Black Legion, Imperial Fist, Doomfire almost, Baal Red, they're too dominating. So when you mix them with another contrast paint, there's a lot more of that in there than there is of the other one, basically. So you'd end up having to go like 4, 5, 6 parts of the other one to have more Volupus Pink be in the mix, and at that point, it's too much mixing. So given everything that we've learned so far, the proof is in the pudding, right? So this is where we're going to test it. We're going to test our roughly 2 parts Larmium Medium to 1 part Volupus Pink mix. And we're going to apply this over the top of some of these parts of this Chaos Terminator, over the top of the grey sear. And we're going to get this on like so. What we're looking for here is whether or not it feels like it's the right colour. It certainly feels like it's the right colour to me. And this is over the top of grey sear. So we'll just keep going. We'll do a little bit more. So we'll do the foot as well. It certainly feels like it's the right colour. And we can tell just kind of the flats are looking nice and pink. We've got a lovely kind of sort of build up of that darker pink in the recesses, which we can always add to if we need to. But what we're looking for is that flat there to be the right colour. It's got that sort of fleshy tone to it almost. You can see how it looks almost red in the recesses as well, because this is a well, this is a contrast wave 1 paint, essentially. And they're still beautiful, even to this day. This is why I love this. It's my favourite part of painting, you know. Figuring this stuff out. And the rush I get from getting it right is just unbelievable. But that's where the experience comes in, you know. So, other miniatures that we've done on the channel before that have been pink have been things like the pink horrors. And we used, way back in the day, we used a roughly 4 parts contrast medium to 1 part Volupus pink mix to do those. But we did those over the top of a Wraithbone base. And it worked then because we had much more diluted paint over a warmer base, which would make the diluted paint appear a lot warmer. And because the pink horrors are fleshy in nature, that's what we want. We want it to be fleshy, you know. They are, well, it's muscle groups, right? So it made sense to do it that way on the pink horrors at the time. It wouldn't necessarily make sense to do it that way on the Terminator, for example, because a lot of this is just large flat open panels. We've used that Lamia medium to great effect because it's just strokes off the brush here, whereas contrast medium we wouldn't get getting as nice a recess here. I think that's the one. I don't know about you guys. So naturally, another part of figuring out a colour scheme is, of course, whether or not we can correct it. And we talked about it earlier in the stream. Not in the stream, this is a recording and a stream at the same time. We talked about it earlier in that the colour, as far as I can tell, that Games Workshop is going to recommend be used to base all of these things in, if you're going to do it with base and layer paints, is going to be Emperor's Children. Makes sense, it's in the name. So what we need to know is, if we create an Emperor's Children glaze, is it going to completely change the makeup of our model, or is it going to help us smooth it out? Let's figure that out now, shall we? So let's go to this screen here. So here we have our Terminator that we've done with our 2-to-1 mix, and well, we're going to take a little bit of Emperor's Children that we thinned down with sort of 3 or 4 parts water, something like that. Probably roughly that kind of thing. And we're just going to apply this now over the top of this foot. And if it completely changes, it's not quite right. But it doesn't look like it's making that much of a difference, which is perfect. It's exactly what we want. So there will be some tonal difference, it just happens. But that looks pretty spot on to me. Let's test it on a big area here on the shoulder. Well, that's our correction right there. So if you made a sort of dark blobby mistake, or a sort of slightly scratchy finish or something right in the middle, you can just use a slightly more thinned down than normal version of Emperor's Children to just accentuate the pink and smooth out any mistakes. It might take a couple of layers here and there depending on how dark the mistake is, but that to me looks absolutely spot on. So the only question that really remains is what's going to be the highlight color at the end of the day. And, well, I don't think it should be too stark a highlight. You see, at this point we could go for, you know, something off-white, but not quite white. We could go for something like, I don't know, pallid witch flesh. That could work. That could work as a really kind of bright spot highlight on something like this, but I think it would be rude not to use full grim pink to highlight. Oh. So thanks to Past Josh, there you have it. That's how I do it, and that's how I do it for every colour. We just look at the recesses and we look at the edges, and that will tell you most of the kind of recipe that you're going for. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Obviously past experience does help. When you've painted a lot of miniatures, you kind of just get a feel for what paints are to be used and where. Now the only trap with that is that sometimes you get kind of addicted to a certain way of doing things, and it's always good to try new things every so once in a while. So, you know, it's experience can be a trap, but it can also be a boon, basically. And the only thing I didn't really get into in the video is I do have a YouTube channel with over 600 painting videos. So I have a backup library of just many things that I can go and look at and see if there's a recipe in there that will also help me figure out what it is that we're going to be doing for the next bit. But I hope this one was useful in some way, shape or form to all of you out there trying to figure out your own contrast plus recipes. And, well, yeah, just let me know if there's any more of this type of thing you want to see. We're going to be doing another one of these about splotchiness and scratchiness. So keep an eye out for that. In fact, as far as this video goes out, that stream is happening tomorrow, and it will be turned into a proper video a couple of weeks from now. But let me know in the comments what you'd like to see, the kinds of these sorts of videos that you'd like me to do, just kind of focusing on theory or technique and that kind of thing. Like, yeah, I'm happy. I'm listening. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all very soon in the next one. If you enjoyed this video, you love the channel, and you'd like to support me further, you absolutely can do so by heading to patreon.com/Warhipster, just like all of these wonderful, amazing people have done. And alternatively, you could become a YouTube channel member by clicking on the join button below, exactly like these fabulous folks have done, scrolling up on the screen before you. There are so many of you out there that it really takes my breath away, and I cannot thank you enough for everything you do, as without you I wouldn't be able to keep making these Contrast Plus videos. And if you really like this video and you want to send me a little thanks, just click on the thanks button just below this video. Don't forget to share it, like it, comment on it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And to make sure you stay up to date, don't forget to click the bell icon. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all very soon in the next one. Happy wargaming.